Okay, in this video we're going to cover section 4.9 in our guided notes. This is page 65, and we are going to talk about how to graph an inequality. And then I'll make another little video for those that are extending this, my honor students, to the quadratic inequalities where you're solving. So first of all, it's just talking about graph and inequality. We are going to we're going to graph these using the calculator today, as far as plotting the shape and the position of the quadratic graph. And then we are going to make sure that we are shading them correctly to represent the infinite number of solutions that exist for a quadratic inequality. So the steps are already listed here for you. Step note 1, you're going to actually just graph the parabola. So that's where we're going to use the calculator to do so. I'm going to show you once on the TI calculator app that I have, and then I'll show you also on Desmos so that you have the two options if you're doing this at home. Remember when we shade or graph an inequality, the first thing we want to do is make sure that the parabola is dashed. If the inequality is only less than or greater than, so it doesn't actually include the function itself. And then we'll make a solid line when we connect the dots for the function if it is inclusive, so less than or equal to or greater than or equal to. Once we've graphed the parabola, then we will shade. So remember, we're going to shade above the parabola if it's greater than, below the parabola if it's less than. So just like you did with the linear function, we'll shade above or below the parabola. Now remember, parabolas are going to either open up in the ones that we've practiced, or they're going to open down, right? And I'm going to draw them kind of two right here, up, or they're going to open down. So if I'm looking at shading what we call above the parabola because it's greater than, above the parabola in this case right here would mean inside, just because if I shade in here, I'm always above that parabola. If I was shading above my parabola that has been reflected or is upside down, then when I shade above the parabola, that means essentially outside of it, on top of the parabola. Okay. If in the other case we're dealing with less than, then we're shading below the parabola. So again, if my parabola is opening up, below would mean underneath it. If it's opening down, below would mean underneath it, which in this case is inside of it. So it can be shaded in different ways just based on the greater than or less than piece. So let's graph a couple of these. So this first example we're going to graph, it says that y is less than negative x squared minus 2x minus 1. So I'm going to use the calculator, and I'm going to pull this up. So I'm going to go to y equals, and we're going to do negative x squared minus 2x minus 1. And again, you can graph it if you want to see a picture of what it'll look like. We often use the table though, so we push second and then graph. And this table allows us to just kind of plot some of these points that fit on my graph. So if I start at, let's say, negative 3, negative 4, and then I'm going to plot negative 2, negative 1, negative 1, 0, 0, negative 1, and so on and so forth. So you can just plot some of those points from your graph. So I'm just going to plot some real quick. But again, we're just plotting those from our graph. Or from our calculator that actually fit on the graph. If they go shooting off the graph, don't worry about those ones. Okay, once you have your dots created for your parabola, then again you're going to look over here to see what kind of symbol it is. This is a less than. And remember, if it doesn't include it, then we're going to do a dashed line. So as I draw my parabola, this is going to look dashed. And then because it's less than, I'm going to shade below the parabola. So again, if this parabola is opening down, below it would be everything underneath this parabola. So we'd shade inside in this case. Okay, let's do another one. So on the right, we have graph y is greater than this time. So notice it's a greater than or equal to. So this one's going to be solid, right? That's what that means. So I'm going to take this function once again and graph it, x squared plus 2x minus 8. Remember that if you don't have a graphing calculator at home, on the home page of our class, you can scroll down all the way to the bottom and there is access to Desmos, the online graphing calculator. So all the way to the bottom, it's the very last thing there. I can click on it. And you could just put your function in here. So I'm going to come back here because I forgot what it was. X squared plus 2x minus 8. So I could put in x squared plus 2x minus 8. Again, Desmos is pretty good at helping you find like the vertex. So you could plot that point, -1, -9, 0, -8, 2, 0, and -4, 0. So those would all be points that you could plot on your graph pretty easily. So again, you're going to come here and you're just going to create your dots. So I'm going down here. Oops, I guess I need my actual pen here, and I'm going to create some dots based off those values that were given there. Nice thing is I can tell if I'm off because my dots will not look symmetric. This one's going to be a solid parabola, so again I'm going to do the best I can to create or connect the dots with a solid line, and then I'm going to shade. So again, greater than means that I'm shading above the parabola. So if this one's opening up and I want to stay above the function all the time, then I'm going to be shading inside. This is above the parabola. Okay. Graphing a system of inequalities is just where we graph two inequalities on the same graph and then we shade their overlap. So this one you're going to do essentially the same thing. You're going to go ahead and graph this first function just like we did it before. Notice that this function is a less than, so we're going to shade below, and it's going to have a dashed line. This bottom function, y is greater than or equal to x squared minus 3, we are going to shade above because it's greater than, and it's going to be a solid line because it's greater than or equal to. So if I were to graph these, I'm going to graph this top one in red. And I know that this is a parabola that's been shifted up 1. Again, you can just plug this into your calculator. But here's this function if I plot these points. Oh, that's too far over. And again, we know that this one is going to be dashed because it is just less than. Okay, so over here, this is kind of, here's my dashed parabola that I'm thinking about. And I know that I'm going to need to shade below this parabola. So below would mean underneath. If I look at my next one, I'm going to do this one in blue so you can see the difference. This is just a parabola that's been shifted down 3 units. So it's opening up. And I'm just going to plot this. Again, you could just put this into your calculator and then graph it like we did the last ones. Oops. And this one is a greater than or equal to symbol. So I am going to create a solid line as I graph this one. So notice over here, again, I'm just kind of drawing this so you can see it. Here's my solid line parabola. And this is a greater than symbol, so I'm going to shade above. So again, above this parabola would imply that I'm shading above this parabola. So notice the overlap, or what is true for both solutions is this part right here. So that means in my graph for the solution of the system, this piece right here is the only part that I would shade. That represents the overlap or the solutions that are true for both systems. Again, you just plot each one separately. It's not always the shared, it is always the shared or overlap shaded. It's not always right between them. If this was a greater than both, then sometimes you'd have your parabola here, you'd have your parabola here. Oh, I did both dashed. And if they were both greater than, then I would go on top of both parabolas, which is something like right here. I wouldn't go underneath any of them. So just depending on where your overlap exists, that's what you're going to shade on your system of inequalities.